Welcome everyone to SEO Office Hours. My name is Michael Chidzey. I'm an SEO here at Good Signals. And part of what we do, along with special guests, are these office hour sessions where people can jump in and ask their questions around their website and web search. By the way, nobody here is in the hot seat, and we might not know all the answers, but multiple heads think about a problem should help. We've had a bunch of questions submitted already, as you can see, which we'll go through. But if there's anybody here live on the call who would like to ask any questions, feel free to flag yourself in the chat functionality, which will be monitored. Also, there's usually a bunch of other amazing SEOs on the call. And I think one of the best things about office hours isn't just the four of us sharing our perspectives, but you sharing yours as well. So please continue to do that because it makes it really, really great. Like every week, with me today is Juliana, Turnbull. Morning.
Hello, Mike, and hello to our special guests, Steve and David. This is my very first SEO Office Hours of 2025. Thank you very much to my twin sister, Ruth Turnbull, dialing in from Australia, who was the co-host last week. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We have Simon, Yogi, Naveen, Rob, Max, Jordan, Walid, Francisca, Neil, Daniel, Boran, Olesa, Asma, and Helen. And we have decided to not have any note takers because, as you mentioned earlier, we are recording this, so you can always watch it on YouTube. And also, it makes it a bit more easier to see everyone and the chat when we don't have the note takers because they like to write loads of notes. So as Mike said, I'm Juliana Turnbull. I'm here based in Barcelona, Spain, and I run a small digital consultancy business called Turn Global. I'm really happy to have on the show today David and Steve. David, welcome back, David Sayce. David, you worked in SEO back in 1995, is that right, David?
It was, all I remember is it was a long time ago. Fuzzy memories.
Lots of good memories. And currently you are the digital lead at Forrester's LLP, overseeing the strategy and delivery of digital marketing. You're also a digital marketing and SEO consultant, a mentor, and you've held many digital non-exec positions. And you have extensive in-house and agency experience. Plus, you've been a regular member of Search London and a sponsor of one of our birthday parties. So thank you very much, David. And over to you, Steve. So, Steve, you are based in Bonn, in Germany, and you are the English language marketing manager at SISTRIX, and you manage the data journalism team that produces IndexWatch, SectorWatch, and Visibility Leaders. You regularly present at BrightonSEO, and you've also got a background in internet that goes back to the pre-web days. How far is that, Steve? Or should we not ask that question?
Yeah, 80s.
Wow.
I have 80s content, 80s internet content on the web. Google Groups, Usenet, the old Usenet, back in the day. I did my apprenticeship with British Telecom before internet started. So I landed in an internet working group and I was like, what the hell is this? What the hell? I told my mom, I really don't know. I don't think this is taking off.
You didn't, did you?
I'm serious. Yeah.
Well, if only your mom could see it now, or you could go back to yourself and see what you're doing now. But thank you both very much for coming back on the show and sharing your insights with us today. For those that are watching us live, as Mike said, if you have any questions, write them in the chat. And for everyone that's watching the recording, thank you for watching. Click a like on the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. And you can always join us at 9:30 a.m. every Friday, GMT. Over to you, Mike. We've got loads of questions today, I believe.
Yes, we have. So the first question, I think what we'll do is they had panels yesterday at the SEO FOMO event, and they talked a lot about predictions and priorities. And we actually have two questions, and I thought we'd start there, and we can either refer to what they spoke about last night, or if we have any of our own. So I'm going to group these two questions together. The first question is, the industry is accelerating so fast. What are your predictions for 2025? And the second question are, what are your SEO priorities for this year? We actually had this question a few weeks ago, but we didn't get onto it. So I thought I'd bring it for today. Who would like to kick off? David, I can see you've got somebody with you.
Yes, if it isn't the human one, it's the dog one. So this is Mia. She'll probably stick a nose in every now and then. Don't listen to her. She knows nothing about digital marketing.
It's okay. We're massive fans of dogs at office hours. It's fine.
I think the big thing going forward is going to be back towards quality. And I've been saying this for a long time. I think that's where there needs to be a greater focus going forward. I think web pages, the internet is being so swamped with there is some good stuff, but a lot of AI rubbish. I think that it goes back to user intent, why you're putting stuff onto a website, what it's supposed to be doing, and trying to measure that result.
Great. And so that's your priority. The priority for this year is quality.
There's a number of websites I'm going through where it is really trying to dive into what has been put onto the website and does that meet the needs of the visitors. In some cases, not quite. It's there because the business thought this would be good.
Yeah. And Steve, what about you? Do you have anything to add? What are your predictions or priorities?
Well, obviously we're a toolbox provider, tool provider, data provider. So I think like any tool provider and anyone watching this video that's involved with tools will be nodding their head. We've got to try and work out what's coming. We've got to try and work out what data people are going to need in the next 6 to 12 months and balance that with what people think they want. And all you agency and freelancer people will understand what you tell customers is sometimes not what they want. So we have to balance that whole thing. So from a toolbox perspective, of course, AI, trying to get data out of the new search platforms as they appear. And there's not just one, there's many. So we'll have to look carefully at that. And then provide the existing data as we've done for the last 15 years. From a personal perspective, I think there's a great opportunity this year for experts to shine. You are ahead of the AI curve, as it were. You're ahead of that AI model. You know your stuff. And you have an opportunity this year to build both your brand and your content recognition. So from a personal perspective, I think anyone that's got any data or expertise out there, use this year. This year is your best opportunity to exploit that.
Great. Joe?
I would say for the predictions of 2025 and the fact that our industry always is accelerating very, very quickly, it's really important to be part of communities, to actively take part, to sponsor, to get involved with communities and to learn from each other. Because I think you may feel that, particularly as a freelancer or a small agency, that you need to know everything. But you don't. If you can rely on others, if you can have a good community behind you, a good support, and look at how many people came to SEO FOMO. I think you said it was 120, and SEO FOMO has over 30,000, I think over 33,000 subscribers, the actual newsletter. I mean, that's grown phenomenally. And that's a lot around community and people wanting to get involved and meet in person and online. So for me, the big prediction for 2025 is communities, focus on that, grow that, but offer something genuine as well. And then, like Steve said, data is also really important because without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So if you have the time and you have the resources, I would really highly recommend that you do a study for your company or the company or brand that you're working for about something that you feel that may be increasing in 2025, but have data behind you to back up your hypothesis and then share that with your community. And that's my prediction for 2025.
Great. I remember years and years and years ago, at the end of one of Ram Fishkin's presentations, he finished with saying that everything's easier with fans. And I think that's so true. If you can build that community and those followers, then everything you publish and so on, it's a lot easier to help that grow. In terms of last night, a couple of things that I kind of took away from the panel, which I thought was quite interesting. One was just this being the year of feeling comfortable with being uncomfortable. And obviously keeping on top of things is something that we all try and do anyway, but even more so with just so many changes all of the time. This being well, not necessarily the year of, but making sure you're being original, particularly with your content. So not just creating the best content, but making sure that it's original and it's not just copying what everybody else is doing. And then this is more for me, I guess this is always a priority that I have, which is just being consistent with what we do. So if we decide to do a content strategy, or if we decide that we're going to run a podcast or whatever, try and do it on a regular basis so you can build a community, but also you can give everything that you decide a bit of a fair shot. Great.
Consistency is a big one in that regard.
Yeah, I think with SEO in general, it's just if you're going to do something, you just have to keep evolving those pages and keep improving the web and so on. Okay, so one other question that we had that's sort of quite related, and Steve, this might be a good opportunity to mention SISTRIX actually, because, well, the question is, which websites are the ones to watch and learn from? And I guess your tool, I like your blog posts that you publish where you share who's done really well, who's not doing so well at the moment, and what we can learn from them.
Oh, do we have an hour? Oh, listen, I'll point you to a couple of products that we publish. IndexWatch, which is the quarterly and annually list of winning and losing domains. You can learn a lot from that. SectorWatch, written by Charlie Williams, is the monthly analysis of a certain sector where we go into, and this is really important, sub-domain level. We go into directory level, and I think it's fairly common for SEO projects to be at the directory level and not domain wide. So we can find high performance content within that and highlight that. Charlie finds some interesting stuff. And Visibility Leaders, which I do at Brighton every time. April will be about travel. We'll talk about the leading domains. So domains to watch right now, I think that are really, really interesting are Marks and Spencer's, because there's a new /food category starting on there. So Marks and Spencer's is basically a fashion website. Obviously, many people call it a supermarket. There's a new food area building on that. So they've got Ocado in the background, bear that in mind. Plus they've got their banking as well on the same website. So when we look back to the last 6 months of sites that have produced content that are not core to their business, and we see what happens to those, look at Marks and Spencer's and see how that works. I'm going to watch Homebase. Their relaunch happened today. I'm going to watch DIY.com, who have a knowledge intent strategy. So they're creating informative content along with all the tens of categories. We might actually mention categories in a bit, categories and their marketplace. So this is a huge mix. So if you want any ideas, SISTRIX SectorWatch, there's a ton in there.
Yeah, I always go through, when you publish those blog posts, to go through the domains and just to see if I can work out what's happened. I did notice on one of them, so virginholidays.co.uk, that was on one of the lists that dropped. And then when you look at it, actually, it looks like they've done a migration.
They've gone to Virgin Atlantic, haven't they? Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So also don't draw conclusions straight away.
This is true. Make sure you
have to kind of look into them. Yeah.
Follow the domain moves as well. Yeah.
But it's a really good starting point to learn from some of those that are ranking really well. And I tend to focus on those ones more so than the ones that aren't doing so well. David, what about you? Are there any particular websites that you're watching, or any tools to keep an eye on websites or anything like that?
I think for me, it's following the commentary on the sites like SEO Roundtable. Another one, Orbit Media. Andy at Orbit Media, I find his content is absolutely fabulous. So those are a couple of the sites that I really enjoy just keeping up to date with. And then, of course, just the chatter across LinkedIn as well is very good. But one at the moment is probably HubSpot, after the screen shares of the last 24, 48 hours, whatever it was. That's an interesting one to follow.
It's not just HubSpot, Yeah. There's a whole raft of informational directories that are dropping. I mapped Reddit against one of my competitors yesterday, and there's a clear relationship with the rise of Reddit. So we're not just talking about AI. There's a clear relationship with the rise of Reddit and their informational content, pulling away informational content from other domains. This was in a single study I did yesterday, but yeah, it's a very interesting one, David, this informational category and the drops across many websites.
Joe, what about you? Any particular websites that you watch and learn from?
Well, I really like the SEO FOMO newsletter because it's grown so much and there's so much information in there. So it's a great place to keep up to date. And also learning.io as well to learn about different elements of SEO. I do also like The Signal, sent by Good Signals.
Oh, thank you. Not as often.
It's not as often, no, but it's still really good. And also I like keeping up to date with what's happening in Google Webmaster's Central blog and some of their podcasts. It's hard to always look at the website, so I think podcast and newsletters helps me sort of give a summary of what's happening that week.
I think the Learning IO website is fabulous. I've used that quite often with people joining the firm, getting into digital marketing. It's a great source of information.
Has anyone actually confirmed that there aren't two Aledas in this world? Because the amount of work that
I know,
lady
right?
does,
At least two.
unbelievable. Puts us all to shame.
100%.
Respect, absolute respect.
Yeah, I said that to her last night, actually. Just such a fan of all the different things that Aleda does.
I just want to correct the URL. I'm putting it in the chat. It's learningseo.io.
Okay,
so
super.
everyone can go there.
I think on top of what everybody said, the one thing that I do rather than go to one particular website and learn from them each week is I just track lots of competitive terms and see and sort of once I usually pop in once a week, but every sort of month or quarter I'll go in quite a bit of detail looking at who's ranking really well for those terms, look at the SERPs themselves, and just get inspiration more so than anything about, you know, what those more web pages rather than websites in general, you know, what is it about those pages, why are they ranking so well, and get some inspiration for the projects that I work on. But to be honest, the search results change so much, so I'm always getting new ideas from it rather than the same old ones. And some categories not so much, but you know, they tend to be the same. But yeah, there's always a track about 1,000 terms, I think, so it's just sort of jump from one to the other. Okay, let's jump on to a more practical question. We don't usually do those type of questions actually on SEO, so it's a bit different, talking about predictions and things like that. And Steve, you sort of mentioned this question actually. So when designing an e-commerce site, how do you decide the perfect number of categories and subcategories to showcase your products? And should we be doubling up on complementary blog content for each, like 15 best wedding heels for brides who want to dance all night? Should it be more pages, or is less really more? Who would like to kick off on this one?
David, you go first.
Steve. Oh, go for it, David.
Yeah, I think this comes back to the quality side. In fact, I think Simon mentioned something in the comments a bit earlier about making websites more crawlable, more relevant, with splendid content and brand. And I think there's something about that. I generally would say, depending on what the e-commerce site is, try and make sure the paths to product are as simple and easy as possible. When it comes to the external side of ranking, having a look at the quality of those pages as well, if they're going to be found through whatever search engine or AI is out there. So really getting that customer intent in place and making sure the pages give that information. Whether more is better, I don't think so. I think it's really, for me, I would say, try and keep the structure to as minimum as possible and work through the quality of the content that's there.
Joe, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. They said, is more pages or is less really more? It's really about focusing on what you want and how much budget you have, so time and money to actually dedicate to this. In terms of the type of blog content, I quite like what they've put, 15 best wedding heels for brides who want to dance all night. I think we're seeing a trend of women not feeling that they need to wear these uncomfortable shoes all the time. So actually use the tools that are available, including Google Trends, to find out what are people searching for, and then write the content for that. In terms of designing your e-commerce site, I would actually look at what's in the market. What are the sites that work for you, that you've liked from a user perspective, but also look at how they're performing using a third-party software or platform to see how much organic traffic do they have. If they're doing something well, you know, imitation is the best form of flattery. So maybe you can take some elements of that and obviously design it for your own e-commerce site.
Absolutely. I think finding these blueprints for success is one of the best ways to do it. Your competitors are giving away a lot of information. Use that. I got a couple of bits of data. Did you know there was 77 categories of hamper. It's not just Fortnums and Masons. So that's a really good example of categorization. But this website I've been looking at, which is Regency Hampers, which is top 5 within their sector, have not only broken down into types of hampers, that they've done what I call situational categories: hampers for girlfriend, hampers for mother, hampers for this. Boohoo do this, and one of my favorite categories of all is all-day drinking outfits in the women's category. So it's situational. They also have airport outfits. So it's actually combining an intent in 2 different ways. And I wonder, I don't know, but I would suggest that it might be a great idea to start packing a little bit more informational content into informational categories, because I've seen a couple of really good examples, Regency Hampers and Boohoo, that are starting to do this. Don't do what Temu is doing, absolute mess. That doesn't work, of course. Date categories, generally, I'm not seeing much success with date categories. That old blog strategy, a lot of old tech websites, The Verge shifted from it a couple of years ago, and Gadgets still have it and are suffering because of it. Amazon, ignore that because you can't copy it. DIY.com, a ton of directories, /department, /flooring minus tiling, /flooring minus underlay, /vinyl minus flooring, /DIY566438.cat. Works, it's one of their biggest URLs, and it has a visibility that websites would die for. The same with Argos as well. Incredible depth of categories. Think about Reddit as well. This is the biggest categorization example on the internet, and that works. So categorization is not only important for your journey, it's also important for measurement as well, allowing you to measure directories, measure your architecture, find out what's working. So definitely categorization for the journey, for the KPIs. And I've seen examples of things working in extreme ways and also in very refined ways as well.
Amazing, like amazing answers from everybody. I think the only thing I would add on in terms of the sort of doing complimentary blog posts is, if, say, for instance, so you've got 15 best heels for brides who want to dance all night. If you only sell 20 heels, for example, you're probably not the best website to share that unless you're willing to put competitors' products and things like that. So it's very unlikely that you're going to get traffic or much visibility for blog posts like that. In terms of product, in terms of categories, I think what you guys said in terms of looking at what competitors are doing and the amount is quite a good starting point. And obviously doing your kind of SEO research and looking at what people are searching for, you might find some opportunities. From some clients I've worked with, that sometimes rather than focusing on functional categories like all your competitors, sometimes if you talk about features instead, so what those things might achieve and categorize by the outcome, sometimes that works. But one thing I would do is just make sure you don't end up with so many categories you can't manage them. And from looking at the search results on quite a regular basis for those sort of really competitive and high volume terms, it is often category pages for commercial terms that do rank, just because they tend to answer the search intent better than product pages, because products go out of stock and so on, whereas category pages usually offer a range of ideas or a range of products or a range of services. So if you have them, I would focus on making the ones that you do have really good and evolving them. And like Steve was saying, maybe add in some informational content and making them better than the others, rather than just for the sake of it, creating thousands of subcategory pages. Put a joke in the chat around, please, that wasn't actually advice, that was a joke. When it comes to the blog post, you don't want to do 30 versions of the same blog post. We have best wedding, black, thick, high heels for brides and bridesmaids that can dance, sit, eat. Yeah, don't do that. That's not great. Great. Would anybody like to add anything else before, or Joe, is there anything in the chat?
We've got some messages in the chat. So Jordan was talking about that the recent changes in Google search have shown us that we should focus on content that's relevant to our topic cluster and offering. If we keep creating the content without any topical relevance, then we risk having these big drops, which then we'd also have to justify this to our stakeholders. So he's looking forward to less spammy content on the web. Rob was just coming back, commenting on your point, Steve, about the Regency hampers, perhaps looking a little bit like a doorway page, though there are essentially all the same products with a different topic attached. So looking at the shop by occasion, we had the get well soon, thank you, birthday, new home for the different hampers. It looked a little bit like it wasn't as different, the content, as perhaps it could be, unless there's anything else you wanted to add, Rob, to that.
We have similar problems with our sites with experiences. So we sell experience days, skydiving, bungee jumping, cooking lessons, everything like that. And we're always trying to decide how many topics we do, whether it's birthday gifts for men, anniversary gifts for women, that you can combine topic, recipient, occasion, a million different ways. But I think what Michael said is important, that we could do that and I could create a matrix with 10,000 topics in, but I'd essentially do them all once. And I'd never be able to go in and update them all again. So you really should find maybe the top 10 or 15 that your competitors are not doing, but have some reasonable traffic, and try and update them. Because maybe there is an argument to say if you do something once and do it well, you can rank. But there are going to be changes, updates, new products, etc. So you've got to have time to go back in and give people an update if you think your stuff is genuinely interesting.
Very good point, Rob. Thank you.
Amazing. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna...
Simon also just mentioned that, with e-commerce sites, they can often be at the mercy of their CMS. It's restricting what they can or cannot do. So it is very much worth spending the money on the development of your site so you can customize it and customize abilities and make it stand out from the competition. And he just shared us a link with RS Online. And you talked about Maplin as well, Steve.
That's old electronics geeks.
Oh, I
The
miss
old
that
glossy
one.
catalogs, we miss those.
One of my first e-commerce roles was actually with an RS online competitor. Yeah, I think the total was something like 150,000 items, and yeah, I think we had the similar 8 books of products. Yeah,
I saw
really good.
Gratin ranking well yesterday for women's fashion. That's an old catalog from the 70s, right? 70s,
Yeah.
80s, back pushing. Yeah, well, having some success in women's fashion. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, Argus
Reminiscing.
Argus has been around for a long time. I think that they didn't do very well, but they certainly have performed much better with their website now. But it takes time, it takes a lot of investment. And Marks and Spencer's has gone through many rounds of administration changes. I did my dissertation back in the 2002-3. So they've gone through so much changes. So interesting to see, what happens now that they've put the food back on the main site, because they separated that a good few years ago, and that was a different business.
Good challenge for SEOs to discuss, I think, is that, the same products on 2 different websites, so under Ocado and under Marks and Spencer's. How does Google work out which is the best, or whether it does both? Could they take 2 in the top 10 because they have 2 good official presences for their product? I don't know. I'm watching that really carefully. Fantastic challenge.
Good point.
I wonder if they do any just exclusive M&S products, because obviously Ocado do other shops as well.
Hampers.
So,
that's
yeah.
exclusive to their website. Hampers and party packs and cakes, I think that's on their website. Back to hampers again. I know that completes that topic.
We'll have to watch it. Right. Okay. Next question. I'm working with a business that maintains 2 versions of its website, one for the UK and one for Australia. Until now, 95% of the Australian website has had rel canonical tags pointing to the UK site, resulting in very little Australian traffic. While the content is largely the same, each version is intended for its local audience. I would like you to discuss whether we should use the rel canonical and hreflang tags together. I understand the function of both tags, and from my research, it appears best practice is to implement self-referencing canonicals alongside hreflang tags. But isn't that configuration conflicting and going to confuse search engines? How would the panel approach it to ensure these pages are indexed and served to the right audiences? And if I may ask a follow-up question, what's the quickest way to assess whether the implementation is functioning as expected?
That's
Joe.
a tough one, isn't it?
Well, the thing is, I would actually ask the question, you have 2 versions of the website, one for the UK and one for Australia. if it is an e-commerce site, or if it's a product that you can only get in the Australian market or the UK market, then you should make sure that you have tailored your website for those two separate markets and make sure that the content is different. Australia is not the same as the UK, as many people know, and what their products that they might be selling may be different. So I would make sure, I sort of ask why the Australian website has relevant canonical tags pointing to the UK site if you actually want to have a presence in Australia. If you want that presence in Australia, build your website, make it for the Australian market with prices, Australian content, relevant content, including news or blogs for the Australian market, and have the same for the UK, just targeted for the UK. And then make sure you have separate areas in your Google Search Console. You've got one for the Australian market.com.au, and you have the .co.uk for the UK market. And then you can actually track within Google Search Console the pages being indexed. If it is separate content, you should see that the performance in Google Search Console, and you should also see within GA4 the traffic coming into those two separate websites.
Great. David, do you have anything to add?
It can get as confusing as hell, that's for sure. It's been a while since I've done the international side of that, but I remember dealing with 5 or 6 locations and trying to deal with self-referencing canonicals and the hreflang tags. It's something that you need to be very careful with, because it can go horribly wrong very quickly without you realizing. Again, I think, as we've mentioned before, I'm trying to figure out why the rel canonical would be going from Australia to the UK. I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah, so I think basically that's the current setup.
Yeah.
And so what they want to do is, so the question they say, so, and I think actually their research, it sounds like that's correct. So from my research, it appears best practice to implement self-referencing canonicals alongside hreflang tags. Yeah. But at the moment, they have 95% of the Australian website using rel canonical tags pointing to the UK version of the site. So I'm assuming we've got a .com.au and a .co.uk.
That's going to be a trick. That you need to go through and again think about the relevant topic for the relevant area and make sure that you have all those tags set up, implemented correctly, and then try and track that and see what's happening.
Great.
I question why they've actually got this in the first place. If there's two websites, you've got indicators within the website, you've got the lang tag in the header, you've got the actual country code top level domain, as well as an indicator to Google. One of the first, it was a bit scary, when I joined SISTRIX, they had an hreflang set up, and sort of 6 months into, can you imagine joining an SEO data company and you're like, I think this might be wrong. I waited a while and suggested that maybe we could actually remove it. Thought about it very carefully before I suggested it, but we removed it and everything was pretty much stable as before. Now, of course, this is variations of an English language. We didn't have that. So there may be cases where they have to be a little bit careful, but I would first look at whether you could actually remove it altogether, because the complexity of hreflang makes it quite expensive and risky. If you could do without it, please do without it.
Great. I think I'm a little bit confused with this, and it'd be really helpful if we had a URL. For instance, if you're selling products, I don't imagine you're sending the same products to the UK that you're sending to Australia. So in that sense, to me, it makes sense that they're different websites. And like I tend to use rel canonical tags if, for instance, I've got multiple pages for the same products for that market, and I'm trying to kind of consolidate things. So for instance, maybe I've got this product appears in multiple categories and it has different URLs, but there's sort of one, there's one product for that audience. And that's when I might implement rel canonicals to sort of avoid crawlers going all over the place. But I would use in terms of international SEO, I'd use those tags to sort of say that this is for the UK and this is for Australia. However, this could be sort of one of those platforms or something where they service, it's the same product for those markets, and it would make sense to use the hreflang tag, so you're showing what features matter to this audience and what features matter to this one. And if that's the case, like their research says, I would use the rel canonicals, but I would have it self-referencing. So if that makes sense. I think it would, I hate saying it depends on this, but I think it does really depend on what you're selling. And if it is different products, I find it hard to believe if it going back to hampers, if it was hampers, that you're sending the exact same hamper to Australia to the UK, unless the two websites are identical, then that sort of makes sense. So I think from reading your question, it sounds like the research that you've done is correct. However, I think it depends on what you're actually selling and what your business does. So you're welcome to resubmit the question with
John,
the
great
URL.
comment.
Have we got any comments on that?
We do, yes, we do. John saying that international SEO for a non-trivially sized site is super challenging and it just feels misleadingly easy. The hard part really is balancing what you can do with what you should do. And Simon said, I'm available for huge amounts of money to help them remove the rel canonicals from the Australian site. Thank you, Simon. And John saying that one of the products for Australia might just be delivered upside down. Very good.
Oh, there you go. I didn't think of that, John. Okay. Okay.
Before we go to the next question, just want to say thank you everyone for joining us today on our second SEO office hours of 2025. This is now our 56th episode of SEO office hours, and Mike and I will be continuing it for the foreseeable future. So thanks everyone for your support, especially you, John. And also, if anybody would like to come on the show to watch live, please do it. It's 9:30 a.m. GMT. And thank you everyone for watching the video, the recording. Please click a like and subscribe to the YouTube channel so you never miss a show. We're running it every Friday, apart from when there's maybe Brighton SEO.
Yeah. Or next time there's an SEO FOMO meetup the night before. Maybe it's just a case of replacing me. Okay, next question. Our client, a chain of shops, noticed some locations rank well in local search, while others don't show up at all for queries like coffee shop near me. Google My Business listings are live for all locations, but some listings show duplicate or incorrect information. Also, reviews are unevenly distributed across locations, and some locations lack visibility even with optimized GMB profiles. My question is, how would I audit and optimize the GMB profiles for better local rankings? Also, what tools and tactics would you use to monitor and resolve issues with inconsistent name, address, and phone data?
That's a good one.
David, are you happy to start? I'm glad you said that.
I'm
Go
happy to start. It's something I've dealt with in the past, and I think I'd probably start by, and this could be painful depending on how many shops there are, pulling out the data and going through it one by one and making sure everything has been completed correctly and in the same way. So making sure that the format of phone numbers, addressing names is all complete, making sure the categories as well are all there and in place. There are tools such as, SEMrush has something built in for local, and is it White Spark? Bright Local? There's a few that are out there that you can plug into.
White Press, isn't it? White Press.
Yeah. And they'll help with the visibility and sorting out the Google business profile. Is it business profile now? Set up across the different locations.
Great. Joe or Steve, do you have anything to add?
Not from my side. I'm keeping my mouth shut here. I have dangerous levels of opinion on this.
Simon mentioned Local Falcon. I believe that might be another tool that you can use to help you. Thank you, Simon. And really, it's really important to keep all these Google My Business pages up to date. I'd always reply to reviews, even if they're negative. There's nothing worse than when you see these reviews and someone hasn't gone back. It might be embarrassing, to have a negative review, but it's more embarrassing and looks bad on the company if you don't actually address it.
Great. I don't think I can help with this question, but we did have in May Rob Dawson-Goody, who is the head of organic for O2 and Virgin Media on office hours. And I think we had a similar question. And obviously O2 and Virgin Media have lots of stores, and he talked about how they manage the local profiles and so on. So I definitely, I think rather than me try and say something, I think I would just point you in the direction of there. So I'll put a link in the chat, and Rob's really lovely. So I'm sure if we'll get him on again at some point, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind an email if you're really struggling with it.
I think just very briefly on Joe's comment there, dealing with your reviews that come in, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, is vital, and it's something you need to act on quickly as well.
Yeah. One thing I didn't quite get from the question was just reviews are unevenly distributed across locations. Surely people review the individual location because it's for coffee shops, not all of the coffee shops in general. So that sort of makes sense. So they would have different amounts of reviews, I think. But anyway, as I said, I didn't help, but you guys did. But yeah, I definitely recommend the office hours we had Rob, because he talked about this in quite a bit of depth. Okay, next question. Do you have any tips for getting links? We've not had a link question in ages. Hey, do we have any tips for getting links in 2025? What are we doing? David, what are you doing for your company?
I mean, I've so rarely been involved in the hardcore link building side. For me, it has been reaching out to journalists that I have relationships with, publications I have relationships with. It's been about building out good content. Funnily enough, on my own website, I remember I just ran it was a test website, test page, and I got a link from, I think, Sprout Social, talking about social media at the time. And it was interesting just getting that one link. The snowball effect was quite something. So I'm very much on the organic side of link building there, rather than the hardcore side.
What do you mean by hardcore side? What's
As in
that?
somebody who does link building.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's an area I flirted with from the side.
Steve, what about yourself? Any thoughts on any tips for getting links?
Break news, stay ahead of AI, do it yourself, organic. Just try and even within your own products, you've got data, you've got information, you can break news. I'm sorry, I'm an old journalist type person, so I don't really get with the artificial link building strategies. I'm sorry about that.
I think that's interesting what you say there, Steve, about having the data and making the news. There are so many sources of free data. I mean, famously, I think it's TfL that you can access so much data direct from them and make up, a decent news story from it. I think that's the way I've always gone about it.
And I think you can bring those stories to life as well. Once you've got that data, there are different ways of doing that to make it, if somebody's on the fence about whether to publish your story or not, I like to capture public reactions to anything to do with data. So we'll go out into, say, Oxford Street or Carnaby Street, and we'll go and tell people about these stats and see which ones they laugh at or comment on or anything like that. And then out of, say, the 10 different news stories that we go out with, or 10 different stats, it's the ones that have we call it like the pub factor, but the ones where people want to talk. One of my favorite ones that we did, this go back years ago, and this is what you were saying, Steve, where you've got your own data. I used to work for a company that a big part of their business is bachelor parties and bachelorette parties, so stag and hen do's. And one thing we did, we were sort of stuck with, we didn't have a lot of budget at the time for a good story. So I just went through the database and just pulled out a load of content. And so, for instance, it's the market leader when it comes to stag and hen do's. So we went and shared our stats with people. And one of the stats was, if you have an iPhone, you're more likely to have more friends, which was a bit dull. And everybody was like, yeah, that makes sense, and so on. But the one that got everybody talking was, if you have an AOL email address, you're more likely to visit a strip club. So when we went out with that, it was just so funny capturing people's reactions, because I remember this one lady saying, oh, that's gross, my dad's got an AOL email address. And, they were just sort of having a conversation about it. And it's just by percentage and all that stuff. But it was just, we could see what people had inquired on and all that stuff and what they booked. And It was sort of fun things like that, but that didn't cost anything. It was just a case of pulling out those details. We also did, you don't need to talk about strip clubs and things to get in the news, but it was just out of all of the bits of data, it had that pub factor where you can imagine somebody saying, oh, did you see that? My dad's got an AOL email address. But sorry, tips on getting links. So I think going back to when we were talking about predictions and priorities, I think consistency, if link building is something, and sometimes it's out of your control whether you do link building or not, sometimes it's not your choice. And so I would say if you're going to do it, it's one of those things that you just need to be consistent with. If you've got a story, you can do all that work on coming up with a great story, but you need to tell people about it and just make sure that, you know, the more people you tell about it, the more chance you've got of getting coverage and, you know, just going out to those relevant places that you really want to be featured on. I tend to think about it in terms of the actual customer. What are they reading? And if I've got a story that's relevant to that publication, I might try one journalist, and if they're not interested, I might try another one there, or I might try different angles and try and get feedback from them if it's not right. But yeah, I think consistency. Sorry, go on, David.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's also worth keeping an eye out on where you're being mentioned as well, because I know I've had a couple of good experiences where I found the brand mentioned online. This was some years ago, and it was actually the BBC website. And it was a fabulous article, and I managed to find out who the journalist was, drop them an email, start a conversation, and get a link back from BBC to another law firm at the time website. I don't think it's quite as straightforward and easy as that these days, but that was absolutely fabulous.
And you had that relationship for the future, right, David?
Yeah.
That's worth gold, that is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's actually something that I don't know if many people do, but something I always make sure I do is if a journalist covers a story that I've gone out to them with, I always go back and thank them for it and sort of try and keep in touch. So I'll add them on LinkedIn, for example, and, you know, we'll try and share it or make sure the brand shares it that I'm working with, rather than just, you know, email blast every single possible publication and then never speak to them again. Always kind of follow up all of those things and ask them if it's something that they update each year or are likely to update. For instance, going back to hampers, if it was like hampers for Mother's Day or something, I would go back to them the following year just before they update it and say, hey, you updating this? Would you like to try? Would you like to see what we're doing? You know, would you like to come to this event and come and experience? It depends on obviously who I'm working with. But going back, because the question is, any tips for getting links? And I would say it's not just about the link itself, it's actually about where you're being featured. Particularly, I'm a big fan of those articles that rank really well for terms like Mother's Day hampers or flowers, whatever, and actually trying to get yourself featured on there. And you're not necessarily doing that for the link, you're doing it because that post gets eyeballs and you want to be featured. Joe, what about you? Any tips for link building or anything in the chat?
Yeah, well, actually, let's go to the chat because we don't have much time. So, good point that Jordan raised. He said that he attended the webinar by Rise at 7, one that was being run yesterday. They demonstrated how local media links generated more traffic to the website and conversions than the big news outlets, for example, The Sun, for a particular brand in this case study. So he's saying that we shouldn't underestimate the value of relevant and local traffic because potentially the intent is higher. Simon's saying, write something worth linking to. Good one, of course, Simon. Yeah. And I would say as well, depending, of course, on the area that you're in, but it's always really important to have sort of community behind you, to be well known as a product or brand, have people trust your brand. And therefore, when you're selling out or creating digital assets on your site about studies or something interesting, you're going to have more of an audience that are more receptive than if you're a brand that obviously people don't trust and people don't like as well. And just one thing for next week, Jordan asked a question about local business, but I don't think we have time for that. So we'll ask that next week because we have just 2 minutes left, Mike.
Great. Yeah, sorry, not been sharing very well today because we've got our regular question. Just on the local link building stuff, actually, I'm doing some stuff with a local organization around here. And that makes total sense to me that they would get traffic from other local businesses and other local publications. If that's who cares about what you do, like I'm working with a local charity, and the same thing, they had no traffic on their website at all because no one's searching for what they do, but actually they are searching for sort of relevant things around it. So I've seen that work too. Okay, final question, and we've got a minute. What are you most excited about in terms of SEO? David, what are you most excited about in terms of SEO?
I think we've got at least 12 months of some serious change ahead of us. I think it's interesting that having come from a time before Google, I think we've been through a period of there's Google and that's what you focus on. Now I think it's opening up a lot more, and I think we need to be aware of how we deal with that.
Great. Steve, what are you most excited about in terms of SEO?
Absolutely everything that David said. I'm also excited about listening to younger people this year to see how they are picking up the new tools. I think that's mega important that we listen to younger generation.
We actually spoke about that before this call and said, do we do an office hours where we find, I've got a 10-year-old stepson. Does he come on? He's always using the web in a totally different way to me. And David's got a daughter and Steve's got kids and so on. I think Sebastian might be a bit too young, Joe.
Yeah, maybe I could ask my nephew. He's 9.5. I don't know.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to Steve and David. Thank you, Joe, for co-hosting. Thank you to those who have watched live. Thank you to those watching afterwards on YouTube. And thank you to those that submitted the questions. I hope we've helped. And I hope everybody has a lovely weekend.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Steve, David, and thanks everyone for joining us live as well and your support on our 56th episode.
Great. See you next week.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.